Earlier today, as I was taking a walk, I saw what, for me at least, is the first monarch butterfly of the season here in the downtown of Milwaukee. I had gone to the Central Library, which by itself is, a beautiful place about which many stories could be told. And I was picking up some books, and then I was walking back by the garden by the Milwaukee Public Museum to see what flowers were in bloom, and there was a single monarch flitting around from flower to flower. And monarch butterflies, I think many of us love them, for their beauty and their, cool story about their migration and all this other stuff that either you know about or you don't know about. But if you don't know about it, you should go check on it. My family has a particular set of connections with monarch butterflies. So in a way, they're more meaningful for me in ways that they are for many other people who have similar traditions within their own families, I think. And it has to do with my grandmother, my father's mother, and with my own mother. So we're talking about Anne Sadler, originally Anne Dietz, and Monique Sadler, originally Monique Lemries. So my grandmother, my dad's mother, was the second wife of my grandfather, Joseph, originally Skufka, and then changed his name to Sadler. And they were really, deeply in love with each other. They only managed to have one child, my dad, Anton Sadler, who lived. They had some other children who were born, born dead. We call it stillborn, and one who died a month after birth. So my dad was an only child from that marriage. He actually had an older half-brother from a previous marriage of my grandfather's. And my grandmother Sadler, she was the kind of person who could just light up a room. She was very charitable, loving, really smart, had a great eye for decor and artwork. And I just remember her being a great person. And when I've talked with my relatives about her, they all, talk about how great she was and, the sort of things that she would do for people. They lived in a suburb of Chicago called Arlington Heights, in part because, my grandfather was making a lot of money at that time, and so that was kind of a hoity-toity place. And unfortunately, she ended up dying in 1977 when I was only 7 years old of cancer. And, if she were around today, they probably would have been able to deal with it and give her treatment. But back then, in the 1970s, many forms of cancer were just going to kill you. I remember her being in an oxygen tent at home and, holding our hands and talking with us even then. And, I was only 7 years old when she died, and my sister would have been, 5, I think. Yeah, 5 years old as well. And so this is kind of a big blow. And it was a big blow for my dad and for my grandfather. Great loss to the family. And then my dad died, as many of you know, in 1982 when I was 11 years old, almost just a little bit before my 12th birthday. And my sister, I think, was 9 at the time. He was very young. He was 36 years old. My grandmother was herself pretty young. She was in her 50s when she died. So a lot of tragedy on that side of the family. And my grandmother really loved monarch butterflies. And she actually incorporated them into a lot of the decor in her house in the 1970s. And in the 70s, for those who don't know about aesthetics and culture and stuff like that, it was a pretty wild time in terms of the materials that were available and the color schemes of things. It was very bright and colorful in many ways. And so she incorporated, these colors, these oranges and blacks and whites and yellows of the monarch butterfly into glass sculptures and decor and stuff like that. And then another thing that was really quite important, she didn't tell us kids this at the time, but she told this to the older relatives. She was a very devout Catholic. As a matter of fact, she even taught CCD, as I got to see when I went with her to classes. And like a lot of people who are, you could say, Catholics, and especially like Catholics who have particular devotions to saints or live within certain communities, they often have a lot of interesting ideas about what God would allow you to do, or what sort of intercessions you might work for. And so she said this. She said, if I make it to heaven and I'm allowed to do this, whenever the family is in trouble, I will send you monarch butterflies to let you know that everything is going to be okay, and to fortify you in doing the sorts of things that you ought to do, to help you feel better, to give you a sign that you're not alone, all these sorts of things. And nobody really took much notice of that at the time. Now, monarch butterflies, as I'll talk about in a bit, they're really not uncommon at certain times of the year in the Midwest, because we're on a major migration, whatever you call it, the path where they go. And they live on a lot of the native and cultivated plants in the area. So we'll talk about it in a minute. But this story, this promise, it came to fruition when my dad died. So my dad dies in August 2nd of 1982 at only 36 years old, lingering illness that takes him all the way up to the Mayo Clinic. Even they couldn't figure out what was going on, and he eventually dies. So during the funeral, which was near, well, it would have been Genesee Depot, where St. Paul's Church was, and the St. Paul churchyard near the border of Wales and Delafield, where we lived, where we had our house, where I grew up. I remember all of us being there at the cemetery, which I still go and visit occasionally, because both my dad and my mom and my grandpa and grandma's ashes are buried there. And, it was a typical sort of thing. You've got the casket that's being lowered into the ground, and all these people dressed in uncomfortably hot clothing, right? Because it was suits and ties at the time, and fancy dresses and things like that for funerals, even in the middle of an August summer heat wave. And now I didn't see this, but my mom told this story later on. She said, as the casket was being lowered into the ground, and it's being lowered quite slowly, she saw a single monarch butterfly, flit its way over, land on the casket. And she was, thinking, well, maybe I'm stricken with grief and I'm hallucinating or something like that. So she bumps her friend standing next to her, and she's like, do you see that? And her friend's like, see what? And do you see that monarch butterfly on the casket? And her friend says, yeah, so what? There's a butterfly. And the butterfly went all the way down into the grave with the casket as it was being lowered. And my mother interpreted that as a sign that my grandmother, Anne Sadler, was sending, a sign to not be worried. And it was a time when we were very worried. I mean, my dad was the bread earner. And, we were supposed to go down to Houston. We were, before he got sick, we were getting set to move. He'd recently had us purchase this boat, which we had to sell to one of our neighbors on the cheap. And, my family was going from the middle class that they'd clawed their way into over the years back down into the working class. My mom had to go to work within months of my dad dying, and there were questions about, what all this was going to mean for us. So this is, a significant time. And think about my mom, 36 years old, and she becomes a widow with two young children. So that certainly would be a time worth worrying about. And so, however you want to interpret this, my mom took that as a sign from Grandma Sadler that things were going to be okay. And my mom took the monarch as sort of her symbol, just like her mother-in-law, Anne Sadler, had, and she had brooches and she had jewelry of other sorts and things made for her to kind of commemorate that. And it's something that has sort of proliferated into my generation. I don't know how my sister feels about it exactly, but I know for myself that there have been many times where things really looked like they were going south for me in many respects. I've had kind of a tumultuous life, often lurching from one crisis to the next. And quite often, I will wind up, even out of season, seeing a monarch doing something. What should I make of this? Is it Grandma Sadler? Is it my mom, asking for permission to somehow, do weird things in the background? Who knows? I mean, I'm not a superstitious kind of person, but maybe there's something to this. You never really know. And it's a wonderful set of memories that I have. Every time that I do see a monarch in these sort of circumstances, I'm reminded of my mom, and I'm reminded of my grandma, Anne Sadler and Monique Sadler, two really wonderful people, two people that made other people's lives so much better in so many respects, and really made a huge impact on me. And I want to talk just a little bit about monarchs before I end this. So the monarch butterfly, again, if you haven't seen one, Google it. They're beautiful. They're these dark orange butterflies with, black ribs in their wings. And they live on things like, in the carrot family, Queen Anne's lace. And if you have carrots in your garden, monarch caterpillars, which are this beautiful, black and white and yellow striped things, will come on them and land and eat them up. There's other things that they like as well. Milkweed, which makes them poisonous. That's why birds don't mess with them. There's even a butterfly that isn't the monarch but pretends to be the monarch, so that birds will leave it alone as well. And right now it's unusual even to see one. Later on in the summer, we'll see lots and lots of them. And by the fall, they're already starting to migrate southward. And, this is kind of a cool story. There's an area in Mexico where the monarchs, all the ones that are still alive, because many of them die, on the way, they will fly all the way from here, or even as far north as parts of Canada, down to Mexico and congregate in this very small area in which there'll be, millions of these beautiful butterflies. And then, as winter ends, they will make their way back north, lay their eggs, the caterpillars will hatch, they'll eat, they'll turn into these, very stunning green chrysalises, and then the monarch butterflies themselves will come out. And so I've, even before my grandma Sadler died, I was always, when I'd see monarch butterflies, I thought they're the most beautiful of the butterflies that we had here in Wisconsin, because it was mostly monarchs and then a few other things and moths, and then our sulfur butterflies, which are also pretty, but they're not monarch pretty. So, that's a little bit about my family's connection, attachment, weird beliefs about the monarch butterflies. They're also important in other people's heritage as well, but I think in different ways. So perhaps you find that interesting, perhaps you find it kind of silly or something like that, but I have this very strong attachment, and it gives me much joy to see them. So I was very happy today to see the first monarch of the season.